Hi, and welcome to the video on converting area. By the end of this video, you should be able to convert different units of area between each other. Let's start off with finding area. Area is calculated by counting squares. Here I have a big rectangle that's 8 centimeters by 6 centimeters, and I want to know what the area is. Well, I want to count the space inside it, counting the number of squares. I could draw all the squares up, and I could find out that every single one of those squares is 1 centimeter square. It is a square that is 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. So how many of them are there in that rectangle? That will be my area. The quickest way to find the area, instead of counting them all up individually, is to multiply the length by the width. If we multiply 8 by 6, that will tell us the entire rectangle, which is 48. And that's 48 centimeter squares. That's what we're counting, and that's the area of our rectangle. But we're talking about converting units of area in this video. So I want to ask you a question. How many millimeter squares do you think there are in 1 centimeter square? I want you to pause the video and think about it for a second, and then come back with your own answer. Okay. Did you say there are 10 of them? Well, you're wrong. There are not 10 millimeters, or 10 millimeter squares, sorry, in a centimeter square, and I want to show you why. Here is an enlarged picture of a centimeter square. It is 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. Now we know that there are 10 millimeters for every 1 centimeter. That means that the breadth is 10 millimeters and the width is 10 millimeters. So if I was to fill in all of these, or the rest of that big square with tiny little millimeter squares, there would be 10 by 10. There would be 100 millimeter squares. So 1 centimeter square is the same as 100 millimeter squares. This is very similar for a meter square. This meter square is 1 meter by 1 meter. That's 100 centimeters by 100 centimeters. That is 10,000 centimeter squares. Another way of looking at that is by saying that is really, it's 100 by 100, or 100 squared. And finally, very similarly, it's the same for a kilometer square. Now this might be a patch of land, but it's a very, very large square, 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. But it's the same as 1,000 meters by 1,000 meters. That's a million meter squares inside this kilometer square. Another way of looking at a million meter squares is that it's 1,000 squared. It's 1,000 times 1,000. And this helps us when we want to do some converting of some irregular units. Let's take a look at what I mean. You might be familiar with this conversion diagram. This is the conversion diagram that helps us change kilometers into meters, into centimeters, and into millimeters. We're timesing by 1,000, timesing by 100, and timesing by 10. Well, if I want to find kilometer squares, or meter squares, or centimeter squares, or millimeter squares for that matter, instead of just timesing by 1,000, 100, or 10, the converting, what I'm going to convert by is by 1,000 squared, or 100 squared, or 10 squared. Similarly, if I want to go back the other way, I'll be dividing by 10 squared, or 100 squared, or 1,000 squared. So we're going to use this diagram to help us convert a couple of examples. Here I have what looks like a small size area, 0.248 meter squares. And because it's small and we're talking meter squares, I might want to look at what it is in centimeter squares. So to do this conversion, I'm going to look at my diagram. To change meter squares into centimeter squares, I need to times by 100 squared. So I'm going to take my 0.248 and I'm going to multiply by 100 squared. Very important you put the squared in there. If you just times by 100, not going to give you the correct answer. Putting this into our calculator, or multiplying by 100 squared, that is moving the decimal point 2 spots to the right for the first 100, and then 2 spots for the right for the next 100. And we end up with 2,480 centimeter squares. And that's how many is inside this small area. Why don't you pause the video and try and work out B for yourself. Okay. Hopefully you tried this one for yourself. We're going to change 3,100 millimeter squares into centimeter squares. So I'm looking at this conversion, changing millimeter squares into centimeter squares. I'm going to divide by 10 squared. So I'm going to take this 3,100 and I'm going to divide by 10 squared, or divide by 100. This gives me an answer of 31 centimeter squares. Very important that you put the units after your answer. That's it. I think at this point you can pause, summarize this page, because this will be very useful for your notes, and use this diagram to help you with converting units in the text. And that's it. Hopefully now you know how to convert units of area, and if you want, you can always ask questions in class. Good luck.